Here's a question. Are you always dazzled by how top players, or even your chess peers, find what we think as an astonishing plans that don't really necessarily come natural to you as you go through the game? Well, truth is, it also may not come as naturally to your peers as they might have claimed anyway. They might have used something that is called a tactical motif. A tactical motif is how you place your piece so that you can make a tactic work, to reenact a tactic that you recognize, to work a solution backwards, if that makes sense. Now of course on the surface it sounds easy, but the complexity increases along with the level. And so today we'll be looking at how we move our pieces based on one tactical motif, and that is pin. A pin is when you attack a piece, but that piece cannot move because right behind it, there's a more valuable pieces that is hanging. Very quickly, let's have a look at this first position that we have here on the board. Black is played by AlexanderShabalov, one of the most top player in the US in the early 2000s. I think he's retired now to become a coach. But in any case, let's see what he plays here in the World Open. The rook is evidently attacked on d5, but do you think he moves his rook to d6? Do you think he takes the knight on e5? Do you think he just moves his rook away from the file so it won't be attacked? The answer is no. Here Shabalov plays bishop to b5, attacking the queen. So obviously now the queen is more valuable, white has to do something to block it or to move the queen away, but there's no good square. If queen to d2, there's a knight e4, hitting the queen with tempo again, and so white did knight to d3. But now as you can see, the knight is pinned to the queen. The knight is attacked, it cannot move. Once it moves, the queen will be lost. So black continue, rook to f5, of course there's other move, rook to d7 as we talked about earlier, or rook to d6 is fine as well. We do see a critical moment here when black plays knight f to d5, attacking the bishop. And just as any normal amateur in this position, white chooses to play bishop back to c1, avoiding the trade of the bishop due to the consensus that the bishop is better than the knight on the open position. However, never did white think that he will fall to this tactic very soon. Would you care to pause the video and find it yourself? Black in this move played rook takes on c1 and exchange sacrifice. Now why is this move important? Because after rook takes on c1, as we talk about, the knight can't move to c1 because it's pinned, so rook takes c1, there's a knight to f4. Now adding more pressure to the pinned knight, the knight will be won next turn with the queen attacking on d3, where the bishop that is controlling the f4 square earlier has been moved back to c1, and so it's made possible for black to capture on c1 and to play knight to f4, pinning down the knight, adding even more pressure to the pinned queen on e2. The knight also attacking the queen here on e2, but now we do see that white simply lose a piece and in this position went on to resign. Shabalov is up a piece and there's no way for a top grandmasters to actually lose this position being up a piece, so white just resigns. The correct move for white seems to be queen to d2, just throwing out the bishop on e3, trading it for an active knight on d5, and if such position happens, I think the queen is still safe, the knight can move now. Position will be improved to be okay for white, but did not play that and place bishop to c1 and fall into the following tactic. So again, as we talked about in the first part of the video, black can play rook to b5, rook to a5, or rook to d6 just to get out of the attack, but then it's important to know how to actually place your piece based on tactical motif, how to work a solution backward, and how to place your piece to basically fulfill the image that you hold in the back of your head. And with that said, finding bishop to b5 may not be so natural at all, but once you find it, it may leave you with countless possibilities. And that's the first game, let's go on to the second one. Now the second game happens between Vladimir Kramnik and Viswanathan Anand, two of the strongest world champion, clashing it out in this rapid game. In this game, Viswanathan Anand plays bishop to e7 after white castles, and already in the opening, white has some edge on how it can continue. Would you like to pause the video and find out yourself, based on the tactic we talk about, and that is a pin. Give you a couple of seconds. The move here that white plays is queen to b3, simply attacking a pawn on b7. There's no good way for black to continue defending this pawn. Obviously he can move his rook to c7 or b8, the bishop is cutting through it, so the only good way to defend the pawn here on b7 is to play knight to a5 attacking the queen and to defend the b7 pawn at the same time. And now Kramnik plays queen to a4 check, so black has to do something. Normally it'll be easy for black to defend, just move the knight back to c6 and it's okay. But now take another time to pause the video to find the best move here in this position based on the tactic that we talk about. So there's a tactic here that wins for white immediately. Have you found it? Have you found it? Either way, it is worth to note that after pawn to b5 in this position, seems like blocking the check, there is knight to b5, taking the pawn. Doesn't really care because if the pawn takes and bishop takes with check, we can see king f8. But the most important thing is rook takes on c8, where it overworks the queen. And finally, we can take the knight on a5 that is hanging and we win the game. And so he moved this knight to c6 to block the check. Seems like an easy defense, but now white finds a way to break through, and that is by playing bishop to a6, sacrificing another piece. The point is, if b takes on a6, the bishop's taken. Then we remove one defender that protects the c6 square right now. The knight is pinned, so we can take our time to build up pressure on that square again, as we saw in the first game. How white mounts out the pressure against a pinned piece is to first remove the defender, and then move your pieces around to actually, just put some pressure on that pinned piece. So again, after pawn takes, we can play knight to e5, queen b6 can be played to just another defender to c6, but then a simple knight to e2 as we talked about would have won the game for white. There's simply not enough defender for white to actually keep defending knight on c6, and this resulting position will have meant that white wins a piece and will go on to win the game. Well, then you might have thought, well, rook to a8 might be simple, counterpinning the bishop against the queen here on a4, and it would have been easy to win the bishop on a6. And it happened in the game, but Kramnik did not care about the queen anyway. He plays bishop takes on b7. So after queen is lost on a4, he plays bishop takes c6 check and pick up the rook on a4. So if you do a material count, white is a rook, a knight, and 2 pawns up for a queen. Material-wise, it should be a good compensation. But the most important thing is the pass pawn here on the queen side that can keep pushing, the connected pass pawn, shall I say, because that's the real deal and is the turning point for white to easily win the game. Not to mention the rook here is stuck on h8, is not able to get into the action anytime soon. And so white is sort of upper rook, if you will, in this position. Again, it is not the material that you have in this position, it is about how and what the pieces are doing to help give you a counterplay. And so in this case, the rook is doing nothing, and so if anything, the rook is worth 0. We talk about this in the relative value of chess pieces. If you haven't seen it, you want to check that out. I think it's a very great video done. And in any case, black plays knight to e4, try to activate the pieces that he has on the center of the board, but then just bishop to b7. The threat is clear, right? Rook to c8 pins down the queen to the king, knight to d6 tries to stop that, but then bishop takes d6, and rook t6. This is just getting nowhere. If queen to d7, as happened in the game, we play rook to c8 check, and even if the queen is not blocking, we play knight to e5. We can quickly see the ending. If queen to d6, we again add another piece to mount up the pressure against the pin piece here on d8, and this should win the game. In essence, it is important when a piece is pinned like this and is sufficiently defended, you must try a way to remove the defender so that you can mount out the pressure against that piece, that in the end of the day you can easily win. You might have noticed the difficulty increases with each going puzzle, and so be prepared for the next one. The next puzzle might be very difficult for a beginner or intermediate players alike to actually figure out in a matter of seconds, but do pause the video for a bit and try to find it on your own. I think when you find it, it will be very satisfying, and you'll just appreciate the succulent experience and also the fantastic idea behind it. I'll give you a couple seconds beginning from now. Right, this game is played between David Bronstein and Julio Kaplan. I don't have any information on Julio Kaplan, but David Bronstein is the best attacking player that you can find in the 1950s, 1960s, way before Bobby Fischer made his name. But in any case, in this position, Bronstein plays queen takes on c3, and after that plays rook takes on e2. Now this might seem like nothing special, especially after rook to d5, everything is kind of defended. But are you sure? Here you can also see the knight is pinned to the king, and so how would you mount up the pressure using the concept of removing the defender and pinning down a piece to this square forever? So you can just mount a piece later on and win that piece back with interest. In this position, black plays rook takes on d2. Now rook takes d2 is forced because you just don't want to lose a piece, but then rook to d8. Again, threaten to win the rook on d2 because it's pinned, it cannot take on d8, so rook to d1 is forced. But here is when Simon William, one of the most famous commentators in chess nowadays, calls this an eternal pin. Can you find the move that stuck white through the end of the game without being able to do anything? The move is pawn to c4. Now congratulations for you who find the move. Until this point, white just has no move. And so technically in Zugzwang, let's say white plays pawn to a4, we then plays pawn to a5. We can just technically leave the piece on a standoff because the king just can't move. Once it moves, the piece will be lost on d2. And so you can imagine if you push all the pawns all the way forward, this will still do nothing in the position. In fact, let's just show it on the board. If you push all the pawns, there's still nothing that white can do to actually just get out of this entangled pin. So when black plays pawn to c4, Julio Kaplan just resigns. Now of course it is just worthy to note as well that aside from pawn to c4, there's a move like king to g7, just getting the king into the game. We can afford letting the king place pawn to c4, pawn to c3, king to c2, getting out the pin. Because let's say if white did that, right? We can just play rook to d2, exchange off everything, and now king be too active inside the enemy territory to make some changes and to win the game. But this is still very difficult and requires technical skills to convert. David Bronstein just put an end to everything, is playing pawn to c4. Now you can't move on. It is impossible to find a move for white that does not lose the rook on d2. And so in this position, white just went on to resign. In my eyes, this is one of the best pin that is done by, chess players in general in history. So let's move on to the last puzzle, if you will, played between Alexander Kotov and Gideon Bakhzai in 1952. Again, Alexander Kotov is, the famous author of the Think Like a Grandmaster book. Totally recommend that book to read in your spare time. So let's just jump ahead into this position then, when white plays knight to d4 and black plays knight to e8. And white seems like releasing the bishop on the long diagonal, activating the bishop a little bit. Here there's a winning tactic for white. Would you like to find it then? This is probably the hardest one that I find in this video. I think it's just good for exercise, but okay. Again, this is solely based on the tactical motif that we know along this video, which is pin. And so try to spend a couple of minutes trying to find the best move here for white to continue. Pause the video, give you a couple of seconds. The move here for white is basically knight to f5, attacking the queen, also is setting up discovery against this g7 square. Now one might notice that black can easily take the knight here on f5, but it can be easily replaced by the knight that is sitting here earlier on e3. Still again attacking the queen just has to move. I believe everybody will see if the queen moves to e6, we will see bishop takes g7 and queen g5 threatening checkmate here on g7. Of course, if queen g6 try to blocks it, we have knight to e7. This is worse, this is a fork, something we know as fork. It will be coming up in the next few videos. But basically fork is when you attack both pieces that is valuable at the same time. And so there's no way to block it really. This position is lost for black. But let's just say move to c7, which happens in the game. Then white here plays knight takes on g7. Now it might seem like nothing after knight takes on g7, but this move blows it all. White in this position plays the only move, which is bishop to f6. This is important to see far ahead when you play the move knight to f5, or else it'll be a losing move to play anything else. Now the idea is you want to bring the queen here to checkmate very quickly as possible, but I also don't want the pawn to come to f5 where there's a chance for the queen to defend the knight here on g7. And so this bishop to f6 I think is a very fitting move to kill black in this particular position, walking him into an eternal pin as well. So the plan here for white is very clear, to play queen g5 and queen g7 checkmate. And so black moved the king to h8, so when queen g5 we can play rook g8 to defend the mate. But white here does not have to be solely dependent on the mate on g7. Here plays pawn to g4, slowly grinding out this position. There's nothing that black can do. This is also sort of the eternal pin that we talked about earlier. The black king cannot go out to, any square. And this knight is forever pinned on g7. Goes without saying that pawn to h6 meets queen h6 checkmate. And so in this position you can see rook to e8, desperate measure, pawn h5, rook to e5. Does not change anything though. After bishop takes on e5, we can still see queen to f6, replacing the bishop, pinning down a knight to the king. And in this position where pawn h6 has arrived, black just resigns. There's no way basically to save this position. The knight will be lost. You can slowly play this position with rook to d1, rook to d7 next move, winning knight on e7. In this position, black just resigned. So what do you think? I think none of these players will actually find what we can say is a spectacular move, if not for the tactical motif that we keep emphasizing, which is the pin, one of the most important tactical motifs in chess. And so this is basically the essence, right? Trying to work out a position, try to imagine your pieces where it would be best put to actually checkmate your opponent's king. And from that, work out a solution based on the image that you've seen in your mind, and also most importantly, based on the tactical motif that exists in the position. Write in comments below how you would use this kind of tactical motif to win your next game. If you manage to break all the puzzles, congratulations, you must be a strong player. And if you learned something from the video, I'll appreciate it very much if you consider pressing the like button. Otherwise, I'll see you next one. Thanks for watching.